April 18, 1943. 24,000 feet over the Solomon Islands. The twin Allison engines of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning screamed in unison, slicing through the thin Pacific air. Sunlight glared off its silver fuselage, reflecting in sharp flashes across the endless blue.
Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Jack Reynolds squinted through his oxygen mask, sweat stinging his eyes despite the frigid air at altitude. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high," crackled the radio. Reynolds' pulse spiked. He rolled his Lightning to the left, scanning. There, tiny dark specks glinting in formation against the horizon. Japanese Zeros climbing fast. The P-38s were escorting bombers on a run over Bougainville, and now the Imperial Japanese Navy's finest were here to intercept. The P-38 pilots knew what that meant. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was the most agile dogfighter in the Pacific. Light, nimble, and deadly. The Lightning, on the other hand, was a brute. Twin-engined, heavy and fast in a dive, but sluggish in turns. Against the Zeros, that could mean death. "Stay tight, boys," said Captain Everett Ev Harmon, the flight leader. "Keep it clean, don't let them turn you inside out." But within seconds, the sky dissolved into chaos. Zeros slashed into the formation like knives, diving from the sun. Reynolds yanked his control yoke hard left, feeling the strain as his Lightning's wings shuddered. The controls were stiff, almost frozen. He could see a Zero on his tail, its wingtips flicking as it curved impossibly fast through the air. The Japanese pilot fired a burst. Tracers zipped past Reynolds' canopy. "Damn it, she won't roll," Reynolds growled, wrenching at the yoke. The Lightning resisted, heavy as concrete. He was bleeding speed, trapped in a wide, lumbering arc, while the Zero danced behind him. Then a voice. "Push her down, Jack. Dive." Harmon's order crackled through the radio. Reynolds rammed the throttle forward and shoved the nose down. The Lightning howled as it fell, 5,000 feet, then 10. The Zero followed, but this was American territory now. The Lightning's compressibility zone kicked in. The twin engines screamed, airframe trembling. The Zero tried to match the dive, and disintegrated. Its wings tore free under the pressure. Reynolds leveled out just above the ocean, heart pounding. He'd survived, but just barely. That night, back at Henderson Field, the pilot slumped around a scarred wooden table in the operations tent. Empty coffee cups, half-smoked cigarettes, exhaustion. "We can't keep losing fights like this," Harmon muttered. "Every time we try to turn with them, they eat us alive, and that damn roll stiffness feels like flying a brick." At the back of the room, one man listened quietly. He wasn't a pilot. His hands were stained with grease, his uniform sleeves rolled up. Staff Sergeant Frank McAllister, crew chief and mechanic for the 339th Fighter Squadron. He had been keeping these Lightnings alive for months. As the pilots argued tactics, McAllister leaned back, his mind turning over something else entirely. He knew these planes inside and out, the cables, the hydraulic lines, the trim tabs. He knew how the control surfaces flexed under load. And tonight, for the first time, an idea began to take shape. Something small, something crazy, something that might just give the P-38s a fighting chance. Henderson Field, that night. The rain came down sideways, hammering the corrugated metal roofs and turning the airstrip into a mud-slicked mess. Floodlights cast harsh cones of white across the parked P-38s, their twin booms glistening with moisture. Ground crews worked through the storm anyway. In the Solomon Islands, you either adapted or the war swallowed you. Inside a half-collapsed maintenance shack, Staff Sergeant Frank McAllister stood over a spread of technical diagrams. He pushed, a lantern closer, illuminating sketches of control surfaces, cables, trim tabs, ailerons. He muttered to himself like a man solving a murder. "If I can change how the tabs respond under pressure." But to McAllister, it felt beyond insane. He stared at one aileron diagram. On paper, the P-38's roll rate should have been decent, even competitive. But in the air, especially at high speeds, the controls stiffened so badly that pilots said it felt like trying to steer a dump truck with frozen hydraulics. The reason? The P-38 had small control tabs that worked against the airflow, not with it. At high speeds, the airflow pushed the ailerons back into neutral, locking the wings. But what if... McAllister leaned closer, lantern flickering, and began wrapping a piece of wire around his fingers. What if the tabs helped the pilot? Instead of fighting him? He pulled a length of steel safety wire from a drawer. This was the stuff mechanics use to secure bolts and prevent screws from backing out. Simple, thin, flexible. He held it up toward the board. Maybe just pull the trim tabs the other way. A silhouette darkened the doorway. You planning to strangle the airplane with that wire, McAllister? McAllister nearly jumped out of his skin. Captain Harmon stood there, rain dripping from his flight jacket. A few other pilots followed him in, Reynolds among them. I heard you had ideas, Harmon said, crossing his arms. McAllister swallowed. It's stupid, he said. Maybe very stupid. Harmon motioned for him to continue. McAllister placed the wire on the diagram, looping it where he imagined attaching it. You've been complaining the Lightning can't roll, right? Stiff controls. Takes forever to bank. Reynolds snorted. That's one way to put it. McAllister pointed to the aileron trim tabs. The airflow pushes these the wrong way once you hit high speed. They're resisting you. But if I pre-bend the tabs a few degrees and lock them in place with this wire... He held up the wire. Then when the pilot moves the yoke, the airflow works with the aileron, meaning faster roll rate, Harmon finished. His eyes narrowed. You're talking about changing factory control surfaces with safety wire, McAllister nodded. Just on one side, just enough to help. Reynolds blinked. Will the brass approve that? McAllister shrugged. Nobody needs to know. Harmon exhaled slowly, sizing up the mechanic. This could get you court-martialed. It might keep you alive, McAllister shot back. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Rain hammered the roof. Outside, the rumble of distant artillery reminded everyone of exactly where they were. Finally, Harmon grinned, sharp and wolfish. Do it. The next morning, before sunrise, the ground crew crowded around P-38 Lucky Lady, Reynolds' bird. McAllister stood at the wing, sleeves rolled, rainwater dripping down his face. He bent over the aileron, threading wire through tiny anchor holes. His hands worked quickly, confidently. Reynolds watched, uneasy. Feels illegal just watching this, he said. McAllister tightened the safety twist. You want to outturn a zero or not? Harmon walked up, holding a clipboard. Reynolds, take her up for a test flight. Reynolds hesitated. If this goes wrong, I'll auger in like a lawn dart. Consider it a leap of faith, Harmon replied. McAllister gave the aileron one last tug. It'll hold. 20 minutes later, the engines came alive. The Lightning shuddered through its pre-takeoff checklist. Reynolds advanced the throttles, the twin propellers blurring into spinning halos. Mud flew behind the wheels as he barreled down the strip. Then the P-38 lifted, smooth and clean into the morning sky. Climbing to altitude, Reynolds rolled the yoke lightly, expecting resistance. Instead, the aircraft snapped into a crisp, immediate roll. His heart leapt. He yanked harder. The Lightning rolled like a fighter half its size. He keyed the radio. Holy. Harmon, you seeing this? Static. Then Harmon's voice. How's she feel? She moves. She actually moves. He banked left, then right. The controls were alive, responsive, eager, no sluggish delay, no stubborn stiffness. McAllister's stupid piece of wire had turned the Lightning into a knife. The sun broke through the clouds as Reynolds rolled into a steep dive. The plane felt weightless, predatory. For the first time, he believed they could win. He leveled out and called over the radio, laughter in his voice. McAllister, you wizard, this thing dances. Down on the field, McAllister merely wiped his hands on an oil rag and looked away, hiding a rare grin. But the real test was coming, because tomorrow, they'd take this wire-hacked P-38 into combat, against the best Zero pilots Japan had. April 20th, 1943, morning patrol, 19,000 feet over the Kula Gulf. The ocean below looked polished, like hammered steel reflecting the rising sun. 4 P-38 Lightnings swept northeast in loose formation, vapor trails curling behind them. Captain Harmon led the flight, Reynolds tucked in close off his left wing. Beneath them lay the patchwork of emerald islands and turquoise shallows that marked the Solomon chain. Reynolds flexed his gloved hand over the yoke, feeling how easily the aircraft responded. The slightest touch and the Lightning rolled with predatory sharpness. He glanced down the wing at the tiny loop of wire, glinting near the aileron. Hinge McAllister's stupid fix, the most illegal thing Reynolds had ever flown with. Lightning lead to Lightning 2. Harmon's voice crackled. How's she feeling today? Reynolds grinned beneath his oxygen mask. Spry, like she wants a fight. He didn't have to wait long. Bogies 3 o'clock. Angels 20. The call came from White Flight, positioned farther south. Reynolds turned his head just as sunlight caught the silhouettes. 8 Zeros climbing like they'd been catapulted straight out of the sea. Harmon's voice was calm. All Lightnings mark and commit. Remember, don't turn with them. The 2 formations angled closer. Reynolds watched the Zeros fan out, their bright red Hinamaru circles flashing like blood drops against clouds. Their formation dissolved into a spiderweb of motion, climbing, diving. Splitting into pairs, here we go, Harmon muttered. The Zeros struck first. One slashed across Harmon's nose, spraying machine gun fire. Reynolds broke left to avoid the burst, and the Zero behind him rolled effortlessly, preparing to latch onto his tail. Reynolds could hear the lessons in his head. Don't turn with them. Don't turn with them, but instinct clawed at him. Turn or die. He hauled the yoke into a hard right bank, and the P-38 snapped into the turn. No hesitation. No lazy arc. The wing bit into the air like a cutting blade. The Zero overshot. Reynolds blinked, stunned, and then seized the moment. He kicked his rudder and rolled inverted, the Lightning slicing down toward the Japanese fighter. The Zero pilot tried to tighten his own turn. Normally that was where Reynolds would lose him. Not today. The Lightning matched the turn, then tightened further. The enemy pilot jerked his head, realizing too late that he was no longer the predator. Reynolds fired a short burst. The 20mm cannon and 450 cals roared. Fire licked across the Zero's fuselage. It spun once, twice, then vanished into the sea, trailing smoke. Reynolds exhaled. Splash one. Harmon's voice was sharp and incredulous. Reynolds, did you just outturn a Zero? No clue what you're talking about, sir, Reynolds said, banking hard again. I just flew the plane. 3 more Zeros dropped from above in a diving attack. One maneuvered to Reynolds' rear quarter, cannons flashing. Tracers zipped past his canopy. Reynolds rolled left, lightning fast, and the Zero missed completely. Son of a... What did you do to that thing? Another pilot shouted over the radio. Reynolds didn't answer. He was busy rolling tighter, deeper, carving an impossible path through the sky. The Zero tried to mirror, failed, and slid wide. Harmon dove past him, guns blazing. Another Zero spiraled down, trailing smoke. Suddenly, Reynolds wasn't flying a heavy twin-engine escort fighter. He was flying a knife, slicing through air and expectation alike. This is what the Lightning was meant to be. 2 remaining Zeros regrouped and fled northeast, tails tucked. Harmon pulled alongside Reynolds. Boys, I think we may owe McAllister a steak dinner. No, Reynolds replied. We owe him a bar tab that'll bankrupt the U.S. Army. Back at Henderson Field, McAllister pretended not to stare at the sky every 30 seconds. He was tightening a coolant line when he heard it, the distant hum of Allison's. The Lightnings wheeled overhead, then touched down in flawless sequence. Mechanics converged. Pilots climbed out, visors up, masks hanging. Every face carried the same stunned look. Reynolds walked straight toward McAllister. Well? The mechanic asked, unable to hide his nerves. Reynolds stopped in front of him. You, he said, jabbing a finger at McAllister's chest, are a lunatic. Then he grabbed McAllister by the shoulders. And I will kiss you right now. Laughter erupted. McAllister shoved him away. Don't you dare! Reynolds turned, shouting to the whole hangar, voice booming, The wire worked! Cheers exploded. Someone whistled. Someone else yelled, Get that man a promotion! McAllister stared at his boots, overwhelmed. Harmon clapped him on the back. You changed the war for us, Frank. But the mechanic shook his head. I didn't fly the plane. You boys did, Reynolds leaned in. Yeah, but you gave us a fighting chance. Above them, rain clouds parted, sunlight pouring through, bright and clean on the polished aluminum of the P-38s. The lightning had finally found its bite, but word of the wire trick was spreading, and command was about to notice. April 23, 1943. Henderson Field. 2 days. That's how long it took for the wire trick to become legend. Pilots whispered about it at chow. Ground crews argued over who got to help McAllister wire the next set of ailerons. Even crews from other squadrons wandered over at night, flashlights bobbing in the dark, looking for the man who had made a heavy twin-engine fighter dance like a featherweight. Reynolds had shot down 2 Zeros in a single sortie. Harmon got one. Every P-38 that went up with McAllister's mod came back intact. It was only a matter of time before someone higher up noticed. The knock on the maintenance shack door came at 900. McAllister was elbow deep in a lightning wing, threading a new safety wire when a voice cut through the noise. Staff Sergeant Frank McAllister? He turned. 2 men stood in the doorway. One in a crisp khaki uniform with polished boots, the insignia reading Major, and next to him a civilian in a rumpled suit, sweating through the fabric. The man carried a clipboard stamped with the Lockheed logo. Well, hell, McAllister whispered. Corporate. The Major spoke first. Sergeant, are you altering Army Air Force's aircraft without written authorization? McAllister wiped his hands and straightened. Sir, I am optimizing control surfaces in accordance with... Don't. The Major raised a hand. Don't try to make it sound official. Reynolds, leaning on a wing strut nearby, stepped forward. With respect, sir, the modification works. It increases roll rate by... Lieutenant, I'm not asking you, the Major snapped. The Lockheed engineer, young, nervous, adjusted his glasses. You're bending trim tabs, he said incredulously. With safety wire. That changes the designed aerodynamic balance of the aileron. On paper, it should induce flutter at high speed. It could... Reynolds cut in. We aren't flying paper. The Major turned back to McAllister. Sergeant, who authorized this modification? McAllister swallowed. No one, sir. So you knowingly violated technical maintenance procedures? Yes, sir. The Major stepped closer. You could be court-martialed. Reynolds bristled. Sir, if he hadn't done it, I'd be dead. We all would. Silence hung thick as engine oil. Then Harmon strode in from the runway, still wearing his flight gear. Major, he said, voice calm but sharp. With all due respect, you can court-martial him when the war's won. In the meantime, we need every edge we can get. The Major exhaled slowly, jaw working. The Lockheed engineer approached the P-38 wing. He ran his hands across the trim tab, tracing the looped wire. His expression shifted, from confusion to realization to awe. You reverse the aerodynamic load, he murmured. Instead of resisting the aileron, the airflow helps it move. He looked at McAllister. This is genius. Reynolds threw both hands up. Thank you. The Major glared at the engineer. This genius could get someone killed. The engineer didn't blink. Sir, everything about fighter aviation can get someone killed. The Major pinched the bridge of his nose. You're telling me a piece of safety wire improved roll authority, better than anything Lockheed's aerodynamics department has done? No, the engineer said thoughtfully. I'm saying he figured it out first. Harmon stepped forward. Major, let us test the modification officially. Flight data? Controlled test runs. If it works, let Lockheed file it. If not, you'll remove it, the Major said. Gladly, Harmon lied. The Major stared at McAllister a long moment, then finally nodded. You have 48 hours. Prove it works. Prove it's safe. After that, I either sign a maintenance bulletin or I sign a discipline order. April 24th, 1943. Test flight day. Reynolds and Harmon suited up. 2 P-38s, 1 stock, 1 wired, were rolled out. Mechanics gathered around the runway. Even the Lockheed engineer stood by with a notepad, sleeves rolled. Harmon pointed at Reynolds. You're the dancer. You take the wired one. Reynolds grinned beneath his oxygen mask. Gladly. Clouds broke apart overhead as the lightnings roared down the strip and surged upward. They climbed until the air thinned and the world below shrank into blue and green patches. Test run 1, Harmon called. Level flight standard roll. Reynolds flicked the yoke. The lightning flicked back. Roll 1 complete, Reynolds said casually. How's your dump truck handling? Bite me, Harmon muttered, wrestling his controls. They repeated it at higher speed, then high G turns, then evasive maneuvering, then mock dogfight. Reynolds didn't just outperform Harmon. He humiliated him, even from the ground. They could see it. The wired lightning moved like a completely different aircraft. When the planes landed, the major stood waiting. Reynolds climbed down, helmet under his arm. The major's eyes narrowed. Well? Reynolds shrugged. She rolls like a zero, climbs like a lightning, and dives like the devil himself. The Lockheed engineer scribbled furiously, then tore a sheet from his pad and handed it to the major. Sir, I recommend immediate emergency approval of the modification, and I'd like to bring Sergeant McAllister to California when the war ends. McAllister blinked. What for? Lockheed's man smiled. To give you a job. The major looked at McAllister. You're not getting court-martialed. You're getting commended. Mechanics erupted into cheers. Someone tried to pick McAllister up. He protested, loudly, but Reynolds just leaned close, eyes shining. You changed the war. McAllister looked around at the P-38s lined up, gleaming in the afternoon sun. No, he said softly. You boys did, but everyone there knew the truth. A piece of wire had changed the balance of power in the Pacific. May-June 1943. The Solomon Islands air war intensifies. By now, the wire trick was everywhere. At first, it spread quietly, by winks and murmurs among grease-stained mechanics leaning over P-38 wings at dusk. Then within a week, entire squadrons across the South Pacific asked how the 339th Fighter Squadron was suddenly rolling like circus acrobats while everyone else fought like grandfathers in tractors. Maintenance officers from the 44th, 12th, and 481st Squadrons all visited McAllister's tent, notebooks in hand, pretending they just happened to be in the neighborhood. By the third week, official Lockheed paperwork arrived. Field modification. Memo. Optional aileron trim tab adjustment. The memo didn't mention the wire directly. Paper couldn't admit a farm-bred mechanic had just solved a problem Lockheed engineers hadn't. Instead, it used polite engineering language. Field adjustment of trim tab angle may improve roll response at some operating speeds. Every pilot knew what it really meant. Do what Frank did June 7, 1943. 22,000 feet over New Georgia. 12 P-38s banked in formation. Smooth, confident, predatory. Clouds drifted in shredded ribbons across their wings. Zero inbound. Single, Reynolds reported. Captain Harmon spotted it. A lone Japanese fighter climbing hard, rising out of the sun like a silver dart. Instead of charging or fleeing, the lone Zero pilot held steady, daring them. Harmon muttered. Bold. Reynolds replied. Stupid. The Zero slashed toward the formation, cutting across the group like a thrown blade. The pilot expected shock, panic, slow reactions. Instead, the P-38 formation rolled in unison, each lightning banking with the same crisp, impossible speed. In the cockpit of the Zero, the pilot's head snapped around. This was not how American planes moved. These weren't plodding, twin-engined escorts. These were predators. Reynolds slipped behind the Zero's 6 o'clock. One squeeze. The 20mm cannon and 50 cal spoke. The Zero vanished in a puff of flame and shredded fabric. Reynolds exhaled slowly, voice steady. Confirmed splash. Harmon made no witty remark. He only watched the debris fall, silent, because on that day, for the first time, the Zeros stopped attacking the P-38s. They fled. They'd learned. The numbers changed. Before McAllister's mod, P-38s struggled to outturn Zeros. Pilots returned shaken. Some didn't return at all, after the mod kill ratios soared. The P-38 became the only Allied fighter that could fight the Zero on equal terms, and win. Reports from other groups poured in. Lightning now rolls like a single-engine fighter. Zeros avoid engaging wired P-38s in turning fights. Pilots request additional safety wire. In pilot lounges, over metal cups of stale coffee, they started using a new phrase. Flying McAllistered, July 18, 1943. Henderson Field. The humid air shimmered above the runway as the sun dipped low. Mechanics packed up tools. Pilots finished paperwork. Somewhere, a phonograph played a scratchy Andrews Sisters record. McAllister sat alone on an overturned crate behind the maintenance shed, staring at his hands. They were cracked from solvents, stained with grease, knuckles scraped raw. The war churned on, relentless. Aircraft rotated in and out. Pilots came and went. Yet the P-38s kept flying, and they kept winning. Reynolds approached with 2 enamel mugs. "You look like you're trying to solve the meaning of life," Reynolds said. Handing him a mug, McAllister sipped. "This isn't why I joined the Army Air Forces. I signed up to tighten bolts and change coolant hoses, not change doctrine." Reynolds sat beside him. "You saved lives, Frank. Mine included." McAllister shook his head. "No, you boys saved your own. I just gave you a lever." Reynolds pointed toward the runway where a row of P-38s gleamed in the orange light. "That wire of yours gave us a fighting chance. That matters." McAllister looked down into his mug, swirling the bitter coffee. "Nobody will remember a mechanic." Reynolds stood and clapped him once on the back. "We will." Late 1943. Front office of Lockheed Aircraft, Burbank, California. The war wasn't over, but production lines ran day and night. Engineers raced against death and innovation, drafting new models faster than factory punches could stamp aluminum. On a bulletin board in the engineering wing hung a small note. "Frank's aileron adjustment, keep in final revision." No fanfare. No medals, no speeches, but that scribbled note meant everything, because a farm kid from Illinois, armed with nothing but stubbornness and scrap wire, had influenced the way a frontline fighter was built. After the war, historians wrote about ace pilots, about daring raids, about generals but in dusty hangars and late-night mechanic conversations, in squadrons that flew P-38s over the Pacific. The story persisted, the story of the man who didn't follow the rules, who didn't wait for permission, who saw a problem and fixed it with whatever he had, even if that was just a piece of wire. McAllister's modification never made headlines, but every zero that fell because a P-38 could roll tighter, snap faster, fight harder, carried the fingerprint of that stupid idea. One mechanic, one length of wire, one small rebellion that tipped the balance in the sky.